All right, Facebook and Twitter followers, this is Coach Kyle Nelson here with a live Saturday little mini clinic for you. We're going to take up about maybe, I don't know, 5 to 10 minutes here, talk about a very, what I think is an important topic. We have at our state clinic this past year, we had a lot of coaches, just an excellent clinic, a lot of great coaches there, very, very talented coaches. And this theme kept coming up with them, and it was the idea of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. I mean, it was almost like, 5 or 6 of the coaches talked about this specific theme of 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. And, it got me thinking. I've heard the theme before. I've read the talent code, and I've, heard this stuff before. And it kind of got me thinking about, well, what are we doing with our athletes to make this happen, or what are we doing to not make this happen? And as you do a little bit of research, you realize that most of our great athletes are not great athletes just on talent alone. Obviously, there is some initial amount of talent there that helps them get started and helps them throughout. You're not, excuse me, you're not likely to be an NBA player if you're 5'3", or you're not likely to be an NFL player if you can't possibly get your body above 160 pounds. But, there are certain mitigating factors. But then, most of what makes people experts is the amount of time and the amount of this deliberate practice they put in. So I wanted to take a look at what this means for baseball coaches and what it doesn't mean for baseball coaches. It immediately takes me to what we do on the driving range as golfers. If you're a golfer, a lot of baseball guys like to golf as well. And what we do on the driving range oftentimes does not mimic what actually happens in the game at all. We go out there, we pound a handful of drivers. If we hit one really far to the right, so be it, so what. There's no consequence for poor performance. And I don't use that consequence to mean like you should do, 10 wind sprints if you, shank a ball in the range, but there's no consequence for poor performance. There's no like immediate feedback on it. If you screw up a wedge shot, you just grab another wedge and you hit, which isn't actually the way that the game works at all, right? We hit a driver, we hit a wedge, we had a driver, a 7-iron, a wedge, then we putt. And so that got me thinking a lot about what we can do as coaches to make our practices more deliberate and to make our practices more game-like. So first, let's take a look at what is deliberate practice. First thing you need to know and understand about it is it's not inherently enjoyable. We want to make our practices exciting, we want to make our practices fun, but the bottom line is that the nitty-gritty work of making great performance is not necessarily an enjoyable task. The athlete has to really be motivated in order to achieve an expert level, and the motivation has to come internally, which makes it difficult for coaches, because then we say, well, what if we get an athlete who's not inherently motivated? What do we do with them? There's a couple options there. Obviously, making them enjoy the practice by making it more fun is certainly one thing you can do. But again, then we're going to lose them when it comes down to that nitty-gritty hard work. What I think that one of the most important things is making the task appropriate for their prior knowledge. If it's too easy, they're not going to be very interested in it. And if it's not difficult enough, then they're going to not get any better. And so I think that is one of the biggest things that coaches we need to try to do, is to make the tasks that we're asking our players to do appropriate for their prior knowledge and their prior abilities. So that's the second thing that is required with deliberate practice. The third thing is we have to give them immediate feedback and knowledge of their performance. And here's where I think we can do them a great justice as a coach. I can't possibly sit with a player for 10,000 hours and give them 10,000 hours of feedback. That's just not possible, not realistic. And so what we have to do is we have to be able to make them the experts on their own performances. And that way, when they go and they work, if you have someone who's incredibly motivated and they go out and they work on their own, they're able to do deliberate practice on their own, and they don't need you sitting there for all 10,000 hours to make them, an expert. They have to be able to do this on their own to some extent. So how do we do this? And I'll talk about that in just a little bit. But the fourth thing that is required for deliberate practice is it has to be performed repeatedly, and there has to be a lot of repetition. There has to be a lot of getting better at specific tasks and small specific tasks. I do believe the most powerful thing we can do is to give players the tools they need to perform deliberate practice. And that's where I think why comes into play a lot. As coaches, a lot of times we just tell them to do things. But I think it's equally as important that we tell them why they are doing things, not just that they need to do things. We tell them why they're doing things. Why are they doing things in a certain way? What is the purpose of this drill? What are they trying to accomplish with this drill? If they just simply go and hit 25 balls off a tee with no specific purpose, or even if you give them a drill to do, say you give them the best drill that you have for fixing a certain flaw, but you don't explain to them why they're doing it or what they're doing, they're probably not going to get very much out of that. They're going to do the drill repeatedly. They're not going to internalize anything. And if they mess it up, they're not going to know why they messed it up or what they're doing wrong and what they need to do to fix it. So the why of everything you do is very, very critical. I think that goes not only for athletics, but I think it goes for a lot of things in life, that they have to know the why of what they're doing in order to make it relevant to them. So the practice, another key focus of this, is that their practice has to continually challenge the individual. So for instance, you can't learn calculus by adding 2 + 2 together forever. You can't just add 2 + 2 together and then all of a sudden you know calculus. But also that same token, you can't take a kindergartner and teach them calculus. There's a ton of steps for them to go to along the way. And I think this is a huge mistake that I've made in the past is I take all of our athletes and I say, here are the things we have to be able to do at the varsity level at age 17, 18. And I say, all right, let's do them. And the reality is that some of my athletes aren't ready for that yet. So one of the things I'm going to try to do is this year, I've got a lot of things I want to try to do this year differently, but one of the things I want to try to do this year is I want to try to meet the athlete more where they are instead of trying to force them to where I am or to where I want them to be. And I think that's going to be a huge thing for those athletes who are in the middle to bottom of your roster, that we are not just going to go out there and expect them to do the same things that the kids at the top of the roster do. Yes, we would like them to get there eventually, but that's exactly like taking a kindergartner and saying, all right, we're going to teach you calculus now. And they're just not going to understand that. They're never going to make that jump. They're going to get frustrated. The motivation goes down. I think that incremental increases in performance and incremental challenges is something that is going to be huge for athletes' motivation. A lot of athletes get unmotivated because they're either asked to do things they can't do, and that frustrates them, understandably so, or they are going to not be challenged. They're going to be ahead of where their coach asks them to be. They're going to be continually doing the same things over and over again. And again, it's a good thing to have a good amount of repetition, but if there's no progression for them, then they lose that motivation because they're not learning anything and they're not getting anything better, and they're not getting any better. So I think it's important to understand that you don't learn calculus by adding 2.2. You don't deadlift 500 pounds by deadlifting 100 pounds repeatedly. We have to be constantly making improvements and meeting our athletes where they are. The weight room is a great synonym, or I'm not quite sure the word I'm looking for there. I guess synonym for incremental improvement. You go in there, and if you take the kid who can lift 500 pounds and you throw 100 pounds on the bar, it does him no good. Even if he lifts it 50 times, it does him no good. And you give the kid who can lift 100 pounds, 500 pounds, and he tries to lift it and he can't do it. And he gets frustrated and he's not going to get any better. So it's really important that we meet them where they are. We do it in the weight room, we do it in the classroom, and we get on the athletic field a lot of times, and we just expect everyone to be at the top of where we want them to be instead of meeting them where they are and trying to make incremental improvements. Explaining to players, parents, that expert performance is a marathon and not a sprint. I think that is a really important thing. We live in an immediate feedback society, and it's really difficult for people to understand that becoming a great athlete, a great author, a great musician, a great anything doesn't happen in a few short segments. I love this one I get from my players. I get this from my players all the time. They take an 0 for 4 in a game. And by the way, I don't know if you guys saw that Joey Votto interview, but he said the best game he had in a season, he went 0 for 6 against the Cubs. I can't wait to let my players read that interview or listen to that interview. But they take an 0 for 4 in a game, and then they go have a hitting lesson with their hitting instructor, and they come back the next day and they go, "Oh, coach, I fixed my swing." And you're like, great, your swing wasn't the problem. You swung at 2 curveballs in the dirt and a fastball over your head, and you took 2 fastballs right down the middle. That was your problem. And, you know, they wanted that immediate feedback. They go to their hitting instructor, and I'm not saying bad about hitting instructors. There's a lot of great ones out there, and most of them that I found are doing a great job. But the kid goes there, gets a few tweaks in his swing, comes back and thinks that they've fixed that 0 for 4. Well, the 0 for 4, maybe there was nothing wrong with the 0 for 4. Maybe hit 2 line drives as a left fielder, you know, just missed a fastball that you popped up to second, and maybe, you know, a guy threw a filthy slider that dove out of the zone on you in a 1-2 count. Okay, fine. Maybe there was nothing wrong with that 0 for 4, but they go to that hitting instructor, they get that like quick fix, and they get that really quick fix, and then all of a sudden it's like they come back and they go, "Oh, coach, I'm fixed. I fixed my swing." But that's it. It's not a sprint. It's not, you know, trying to go 4 for 4 that next game, right? It's trying to become incrementally better each and every practice that you have. True expert performance happens over a long period of time, not in a 30-minute hitting session. And so, you know, those are just a few of my thoughts on the expert, becoming an expert, 10,000 hours of deliberate practice. Things that we do, just a couple things we do to make sure that we're doing more deliberate practice. Again, we give them the why, make sure we have the why. Number 2, we try to make things as game-like as possible. Even T-work, that's one of those things that a lot of times is difficult to make game-like, but we always want to make sure we're making some kind of a decision before we just go ahead and swing a bat, or we have some kind of a focus before we swing a bat. We want to work more random practice in instead of block practice. The basic difference between those, random practice, it's a good, ground balls is a really good analogy and way to, that's the word I was looking for earlier, was analogy. It's a really good analogy for it. If I tell my guys I'm going to hit them 4 ground balls straight at them, 2 to their left, 2 to their backhand side, and 2 slow rollers, they don't have to make any decisions. I've told them what's exactly going to happen. But if I tell them I'm going to hit you 8 ground balls, and then I hit, you know, 1 at them, 1 to their backhand side, a slow roller, 1 at them, forehand, a high chopper. They have to then make decisions. And so that's what random practice is. It's basically making decisions, recognizing the situation prior to, prior to getting, and I can go a lot on random and block practice. I just wanted to give you a little insight into what that is. But we do a lot of random practice once we get out of the initial skill development phase. Block practice is really good for initial skill development. If you've never done a backhand before and you're trying to learn how to backhand a ball, you do block practice. We're going to work on 20 backhands, and then after that, we're random practice. You have to recognize when you need to backhand a ball and when you don't, and that learning process of when do you need to do something is a huge part of being able to translate things from practice into game. So that's a little bit of how we try to reach 10,000 hours. Recap real quick. Number 1, give them the tools they need to do it on their own. Give them the why so that they know when they're working on their own, why they're doing certain things and what they need to be looking for to give themselves feedback. Really difficult to get 10,000 hours with a private instructor, private coach to give you a specific feedback. And then make sure that you're giving them incremental things to make them better, not staying where they're at, not going too far ahead of them. You need to push the edge of their ability level each and every day. So thanks a lot for being on here. I left a link in here to our 5 hitting drills that help with this 10,000 hours. Just a few things that we use for our hitters in order to make sure that what they're doing is more deliberate practice instead of just going and hitting, 20 swings off a tee and not getting very much out of it. So thanks for being a follower on Twitter, Facebook. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your weekend and never stop learning.